Welcome to another edition of Diverse Orange. I'm Tedu Bushan, co-executive director of Fusion Fest, and I'll be filling in for Terry Olson while he's traveling around the Baltic Sea. Our guest today is Alicia Ramkirpal Senhouse, who is a former winner of our Culinary Arts Contest Home Chefs Edition and a professional vlogger focused on her heritage and food and what that means to her here in Central Florida. Welcome to the show, Alicia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I always enjoy our conversations, so I'm looking forward to getting to know a little bit more about you. To begin with, will you tell us a little bit about where you were born and what brought you here to Central Florida?
Sure. So I am originally from New York. I grew up in an area called South Ozone Park, which is adjacent to Little Guyana in Queens. Um, and I moved to Central Florida about 10 years ago. The company my husband was working for at the time, they moved headquarters to Southwest Florida, and I had just had my first son. My parents also live here, so it made sense for us to move. And then he transferred over to Orlando, so we moved here about it's been about 6 or 7 years now, and it's been awesome. I love New York, and I miss the food, I miss my family, but I really enjoy living here in Florida.
That's awesome. I know that it's such a dynamic change going from New York to, I think you mentioned to me before it was Southwest Florida that you had
Yes.
originally moved. And I know that your background is Guyanese. So
Yeah.
being close to that tight community over there and then moving to Fort Myers, what are some of the changes that you faced when you first moved here?
Well, something that I noticed right away was that there wasn't a central area, like, and in New York, it's like this for every, ethnic community. They have pockets of communities all over the city where you can go and buy your groceries and go to temples and mosques and all kinds of community centers. And here, everything just seemed to be really spread out. And it was the same in Southwest Florida as it is here. I mean, I live in Sanford, so whenever I need to buy like Caribbean or West Indian products, I do have to venture like 45 minutes out to get what I need. And I mean, you can buy stuff online, but then, it's just more expensive. It's a little more convenient to just make that trip like every 2 weeks to get everything I need. So it takes a little bit more effort. But, I do it because I'm a blogger. I love cooking. It's part of our everyday, like my recipes and what I do. It's my lifestyle. So, by any means necessary, if I need to get those vegetables, I'm
I
driving
love
to where
that.
I gotta go.
So I know you said that you're a vlogger, and
Mhm.
tell me how you got into that. Is that something that you always did? Something you did in New York? Just walk me through that.
Yeah, sure. So I've been a food blogger now for about 14 years, and it started off as a hobby. I actually started my professional career as a pharmaceutical sales rep, and at the time, the industry was much different back then. There was a lot of leniency, and I had a lot of like conflictions about what I was doing for a living. And I went back to school, and in grad school, I got my master's degree in market research, and I started this blog as a hobby, like a creative outlet, because the school was just very technical for me, and I needed something as a creative outlet, and um, it just bloomed into a career. I decided, I can, instead of going traditional marketing, I can get into food media, and there's so many ways that it has served me, and the community. Back then, like I said, it was just a hobby, but there was a need for Guyanese recipes online. There were only about two other bloggers at the time, and there just wasn't a plethora of Guyanese recipes. And so I feel like I was doing something for myself, like trying to stay connected to my culture, because I was living far away from the Guyanese community. And becoming a blogger, it sort of kept me connected to the community in a unique way at that time. Um, And that's how it sort of like over the years it just bloomed into this beautiful career for me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And when you first started, I know you said that there was a need, and it was a way for you to stay connected. Was that a big burst into the scene? Tell me how that began for you. Was it slow, steady? How did you continue to build and make it sustainable for 14 years?
Um, in the beginning, it was not easy. Like, I remember people were like, "You've got a bachelor's degree, and you're cooking, and you're putting recipes online. Like, that's what you're doing." Um, so and it was, people didn't understand at the time, but I saw a vision for it.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a little bit slow and steady, and then after about 2 years, it really picked up. And you know, I was born in New York. I'm of Guyanese heritage. My parents were born in Guyana, and so to be a food ambassador for Guyanese cuisine, but not being born in that country and growing up like there and like really really knowing the food in that way, I started to see a lot of like unique challenges, that was related to my identity. And so I just kept exploring. I kept exploring the food and trying to understand it more, help me understand the culture more, and writing about it. And that kept the blog going over the last 14 years. And I did take breaks in between.
Yeah.
It was hard once I had my boys to keep blogging, because I was doing it all, like cooking the food, taking the photographs, writing the blog post, and then also promoting it on social media when that became a thing.
Right.
So it became a lot. And I said, I need to take breaks when my family needs me. Like, the beautiful thing about blogging is that the recipes are there. They're there online. So even though I wasn't like actively doing it, whatever people needed, they could still get it. And so that's how my brand has been able to stay relevant and be alive 14 years
Yeah.
later. Yeah.
I think it's great that you found a need, whether it's for
Mhm.
yourself, um, and just a way to stay connected. And so you began this, and it sort of built an online presence and community. I also love how you talk about your parents were born in Guyana and you're first generation
Mhm.
American born here in New York. Um, how you had to kind of dive into it more. Was it something that was accepted in your culture, although you are of the blood, of the culture, but you're born here in America? I'm sure that had some of its challenges. Did you face any of those, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, I definitely did. And, in the beginning, I was naive. Like, I didn't see why it was or why it could be a problem or why anyone would have an issue with it. But, when you start to substitute ingredients
Mm,
based on what's available, it's like, well, that's
yes.
not authentic.
Mm,
And, I think, like, okay, but I can't get the vegetables that grow in Guyana. I can't get certain, like, for example, I'll give you an example of eggplant. The American eggplant that we get here, it's larger, it's
more
a
color.
lot more robust looking, but the ones in Guyana are a little bit more smaller and slender, and it also tastes different. It has a slight like creamier taste, I think.
It's like
um
probably non-GMO or something.
maybe that's what it is, maybe, yeah. um and so like things like that, like just making substitutions for what's available to me, I don't think it was as accepted in the beginning, but now like that's the way of the world. When you move out of a community, you use what's available to you if you want
That's
to make
right.
something that's close to your heritage. And also like the titles of recipes. When we saute vegetables, we say fry, but I think as a culinary term, when people hear fry, they think deep fry.
Yeah.
And so, if I say like sauteed pumpkin, which is we would call fried pumpkin, we're sauteing it with onions until it melts down and it turns into like this beautiful, like just delicious dish. I remember people will send messages, DMs and emails, and they're like, "You're Americanizing our food," and you know this is where the identity struggle comes in, because I didn't see how I was doing that. But at the same time, like, you have to be able to decipher, is this constructive criticism? Am I doing something to hurt the culture, or um, am I thinking through this, the right way? And there's all these other things to consider too, like SEO, when you're writing blog posts, but your followers don't really understand that, and why you may need to term things a certain way, or describe things a certain way. Um, and so it became a challenge. It definitely became a challenge over the years. And my identity struggles started to resurface. Like, I think everyone who's a child of an immigrant, growing up in America, has had this struggle in some form or the other. And me, as a cultural ambassador for food, like, people are so tied to food. When you talk about like where you're from and food, like, people get so passionate, and you can't mess with that. You cannot mess with that. So, it was difficult for me, but I sorted it out. Like, as time went on, I'm like, you know what? Guyanese American is very specific. I do make recipes that are Guyanese, but because of maybe some ingredients I'm using, it's more Guyanese American. The way it looks, the way it tastes, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
I will never have the experiences my parents did growing up in their country, and when they tell me these stories, I feel like I missed out on something that I needed to complete me. But as I've grown older, I've just realized, like, my experience is so unique living here in America, the struggles that they went through so I could have an easier life or more opportunities. Like, I'm okay with my identity being Guyanese American and not completely Guyanese because I wasn't born there.
that's
That was a
great.
long answer to your
No,
question, but
no. And I think it's so necessary, and it's a needed dialogue for people to understand, because oftentimes we see this happen, like you said, with children of immigrants, or first generation Americans, where there's so much pressure to be American. That's what you moved here for. This is what your parents sacrificed for. You
yeah,
have to learn to speak the language. You have to learn to integrate and fit in. But then there's this whole other home aspect where, you still have to keep that home um, national pride or heritage
yeah,
pride. And there's expectations on both ends of
yes,
this.
yeah,
So I feel like just going through it in some senses. I'm not a first generation American. My children, for my family, would be our
mhm,
first generation American, and but I did grow up here as well.
okay,
So sometimes the expectations that when we go home, they would look at us as the Americans,
mm,
until they realized how rooted and grounded we were in our culture, and
mhm,
that there was really no gap other than physical place. And that has a lot to do with
mhm,
it. But I think it's so important for you to share these stories and to be very open and candid about it, because there's people who are relating to you. There's always
mhm,
people coming into this country, and there's always a new generation that's going to emerge. And
yeah,
you are part of three worlds: the past, the present, and the future. And when I
yeah,
say the future, you are a bridge that connects those two, because you can understand both ends of that. So while some people may look at it as substitutions,
mhm,
um, we look at it as a fusion, because
okay,
this is what's around you, and this
yes,
is who you are. You are a fusion by the outside
mhm,
influences, but in your heart, you're always um, proud to be Guyanese and proud to be American.
yes,
That's
yes,
100% okay. And I think we as a society need to look at that and praise that. It takes the next generation to move us forward. So instead of
mhm,
ridiculing them or looking at them as different, we should be looking at them and guiding them to say, I love where you're going with this. Take this with you. Take this
yes,
with you. Take
yes,
this knowledge, share this, so that when the future generations go back home to Guyana, it's easy for them to just plug in and say, oh, yeah,
mhm,
oh, this is what my grandma, my auntie, my dad, my
mhm,
mom were talking about, my cousins. And
Mhm.
there's, no gap in between that. So I think what you're doing is very important. And then raising your two sons here. Food is a big part of culture. I also think
Mhm.
it's one of the most essential parts of education in general. It has
Yes.
math, it has creativity, there's vibrancy to that, and there's medicine to it as well. So
Yes.
when you spoke about, your career and conflicts, I don't know if it has anything to do with that, but food is our first form of medicine. And coming
Yes.
from a cultural background, that I'm somewhat familiar with, I know that everything is fresh in its herbs, and that's a part of our whole physical, spiritual makeup here. And that's what keeps us whole and well. But also being
Yes.
able to express yourself through a creative form is part of that wellness. So thank you so much for sharing with us. I wish this conversation could continue to go on, but I hope it piqued
Thank you.
everyone's interest in there. So if you want to find her, you could find her at her Instagram, and I'll let her go ahead and tell that to you.
Sure. It's Elisa's Pepper Pot, and my website is elisa'spepperpot.com.
So be on the lookout. She's always creating new content, lots of great recipes. In fact, she mentioned that it's great to see some of her recipes from years ago still get clicks on there. Remember, we're all fused together, all for each other. Until our next episode, we'll see you then. Aloha.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. This was a great interview.